The morning began like every other Tuesday in Atlanta. The sun pushed its way through the blinds of Marissa Cole's small apartment, drawing pale stripes across her living room floor. The sound of traffic drifted up from the street below, blending with the faint hum of her coffee maker and the soft meow of her cat, Daisy, rubbing against her leg. For a moment, everything felt perfectly ordinary. Marissa, 36 years old and a third-grade teacher, tied her hair back into a neat bun and padded into the bathroom. She had a full day ahead, lesson plans, a parent conference, and maybe dinner with her best friend Lydia if she could squeeze it in. Life wasn't glamorous, but after a bitter divorce from her ex-husband Damien, she had fought hard for this normalcy. The stability was something she cherished. She leaned toward the mirror, toothbrush in hand, when she noticed a thin trickle of crimson sliding from her left nostril. At first, she laughed under her breath. Seriously? A nosebleed now? She muttered, reaching for a tissue. Atlanta's fall air had been dry, and she figured it was nothing unusual. She pinched the bridge of her nose, tilted her head forward, and waited. But as she pulled the tissue away, her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just blood. A small, pale strip of skin clung to the tissue, curled at the edges, as if it had been peeled away from her face. "What the hell?" Marissa whispered, staring at the grotesque little shred. Her pulse raced. She touched her cheek, half expecting more to come off, but her fingertips met only warm skin. She shook her head, forcing a nervous laugh. "It's fine. Probably dry skin." Still, the image stuck in her mind. She rinsed her face, dabbed on moisturizer, and told herself not to overthink it. But when she glanced back in the mirror, a faint raw patch had already formed along the side of her nose, pink and angry like a fresh burn. The doorbell rang, her neighbor leaving a package. She pressed another tissue to her nose, trying to ignore the unsettling sting. As she returned to her bedroom, she picked up her phone and called Lydia. "Morning, stranger," Lydia answered cheerfully. "Hey," Marissa said, her voice tight. "Quick question. Can a nosebleed make skin come off?" There was a pause. "Come off? Like a scab?" "No. Like actual skin. A piece. I'm looking at it right now." "Marissa, that doesn't sound right. You should go to urgent care." "It's probably nothing," Marissa insisted, pacing her bedroom. "I don't have time today. Parent conference, lesson prep. Forget school. If skin is falling off your face, that's not normal." Marissa forced a laugh, though her chest tightened. "You're making it sound dramatic." "Because it is dramatic. I'm serious, March. Promise me you'll get it checked." "I'll think about it," Marissa said, hanging up before her friend could press further. She dressed quickly, pulling on a gray sweater and dark jeans, trying to shove the unease down deep. But as she applied makeup in the mirror, her stomach dropped. The foundation caked unevenly over the raw spot, and when she dabbed with the sponge, another sliver of skin clung to it. She dropped the sponge into the sink, heart hammering. "No, no, no," she whispered. She pressed the tissue harder, as if she could keep her face together by sheer force. Her reflection looked back at her, pale and frightened, the tiniest ripple of horror beginning to spread across her once calm morning. By the time she grabbed her bag and headed out the door, the tissue she held to her face was spotted with both blood and faint shreds of flesh. Each step down the hall felt heavier than the last. She told herself it was nothing, that she was overreacting, that Lydia was being dramatic. But deep inside, a seed of dread had been planted. Something wasn't right. Something was happening beneath her skin, and it was only the beginning. By the time Marissa reached the parking lot outside her school, the dull sting on her face had turned into a burning ache. She caught her reflection in the rearview mirror, and her stomach lurched. The raw patch that had started on her nose had widened, creeping across her cheek like a spreading rash. The skin looked loose, swollen, almost as if it didn't belong to her. She dabbed the area with a fresh tissue. This time, more than blood smeared across it. There were faint pink shreds, sticky and soft. She gagged, tossing the tissue onto the passenger seat. "I can't go in like this," she whispered to herself, gripping the steering wheel so hard her knuckles turned white. "Something's wrong. Something's really, really wrong." She pulled out her phone and dialed the nearest urgent care clinic. "Can you come in now?" the receptionist asked. "Yes, right now," Marissa replied, her voice shaking. The clinic's waiting room was half empty, but time felt like it moved in slow motion. Marissa kept her head low, clutching a tissue to her face, avoiding the curious glances of the other patients. When the nurse finally called her name, she bolted upright, relief mixed with terror. Inside the exam room, the nurse asked her to remove the tissue. I don't know if you want to see this," Marissa said. "That's why you're here," the nurse replied gently. With trembling fingers, Marissa lowered the tissue. The nurse's eyes widened almost instantly. "I'll get the doctor," she murmured, hurrying out before Marissa could ask a single question. Moments later, Dr. Peterson walked in. He was calm, practiced, but even he flinched when Marissa revealed the raw, bloody patch spreading across her face. "Marissa, how long has this been happening?" he asked, putting on gloves. "This morning. It started as a nosebleed. Then skin just started peeling off." Her voice cracked. Am I dying?" The doctor didn't answer right away. He leaned closer, his brow furrowing. "This doesn't look like a simple infection. It's aggressive." "What does that mean?" "It means I want you in a hospital. Immediately." Marissa's chest tightened as though the walls were closing in. "Hospital? You think it's that serious?" "I don't think." "I know." He pressed the intercom button. "Call for transport, now." Within an hour, she was lying on a gurney in the emergency department of Atlanta General Hospital. Bright fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the antiseptic smell made her nauseous. Nurses surrounded her, snapping on gloves, clipping monitors to her chest, inserting N4 into her arm. The pace of everything made her panic rise higher. "What's happening to me?" she demanded, her voice breaking. A young nurse squeezed her hand. "We're going to find out. Just hang on." When Dr. Hernandez, the chief infectious disease specialist, appeared at her bedside, his expression was grave. He asked her questions rapidly about recent cuts, travel, food, even her skincare routine. Marissa shook her head helplessly. I don't know. I live a normal life. I go to work. I come home. That's it." The doctor studied the angry wound now spreading down her cheek. "This looks like necrosis. We need to confirm, but it's possible you've contracted something very rare, something we call necrotizing fasciitis." The words sounded alien, terrifying. "Necrotizing what?" "Flesh-eating bacteria," he explained, his voice low. Marissa froze. Her body went cold. "You're saying something is eating my face?" "I'm saying it's destroying the tissue. We're going to do everything we can to stop it." She was wheeled into an isolation room, the walls painted sterile white, the hum of machines filling the silence. Alone, she tried to hold herself together. But as her hand brushed the edge of her face, another flap of skin came loose. She cried out, muffling her sobs into the pillow. A nurse rushed in. "It's okay. We've got you." "No," Marissa whispered, tears soaking the sheets. "You don't. My face is falling off." The nurse hesitated, then gently tucked the blanket around her shoulders. "You're stronger than you think. Don't give up." But Marissa couldn't stop thinking of the mirror that morning. How quickly her reflection had changed, how fast her sense of normal life had slipped away. Only hours earlier, she had been brushing her teeth, thinking about lesson plans. Now, she was a medical emergency, her face dissolving before her eyes. As the door shut again and the hum of machines returned, Marissa realized with chilling clarity, this was no simple sickness. This was war, and her own body was the battlefield. The decision came faster than Marissa could process. "We can't wait," Dr. Hernandez said firmly, standing at the foot of her hospital bed. His eyes were steady but unflinching. "If we don't remove the infected tissue now, the bacteria could spread to your bloodstream. That would mean sepsis, and that would mean," He trailed off, the silence finishing the sentence for him. Marissa clutched the edge of her blanket, her knuckles trembling. You mean I could die? The doctor nodded once. Yes, but if we move quickly, we can stop it. Her body trembled as tears welled in her eyes. Do it, please. Whatever you have to do. Within minutes, the room transformed into a blur of motion. Nurses prepped her for emergency surgery, slipping 4 lines into her arms, adjusting her oxygen mask. A cold antiseptic scent filled the air as they swabbed her skin. The fluorescent lights above burned into her eyes until the anesthesiologist leaned close. Deep breaths, Marissa, he said softly, placing the mask over her face. Count back from 10. Her chest rose and fell. 10, 9, 8. By the time she whispered 7, the world dissolved into darkness. In the operating room, a dozen gloved hands moved swiftly. Scalpel. Suction. Monitor beeps. The bacteria was advancing across her cheek toward her eye, eating away at healthy tissue with ruthless speed. Dr. Hernandez's voice cut through the hum of machines. We need to be aggressive. Take everything that looks compromised. The nurses exchanged tense glances, but followed orders. Flesh was trimmed away, layer by layer, each cut a brutal trade, her appearance for her survival. It was surgery not of restoration, but of sacrifice. Marissa drifted in a haze of anesthesia, caught between consciousness and memory. Images rose unbidden from her past. Her mother's laughter, summer afternoons with Lydia, the day she signed her divorce papers, walking out of Damien's house for the last time. And then, darker flashes, Damien's voice, low and venomous. If you ever leave me, don't think you'll walk away untouched. I'll make sure the world never looks at you the same. The memory jolted her even in her unconscious state, like a warning buried deep in her bones. When she awoke, the world was blurry. The first thing she noticed was the smell, sharp antiseptic mixed with something faintly metallic. The second was the weight of bandages swaddling her face. Her throat was raw, her body heavy. Marissa? She blinked. Dr. Hernandez stood at her bedside. His voice was calm, but carried the weight of bad news. You made it through the surgery, he said. Her voice cracked as she whispered, but he hesitated, then spoke carefully. We had to remove a significant portion of tissue. We stopped the spread, but there will be permanent scarring. Marissa turned her head toward the window, staring at the sliver of daylight filtering through the blinds. Her chest tightened. You're telling me I'll never look the same. I'm telling you you're alive, the doctor replied gently. And that's what matters right now. Alive. The word felt both like a blessing and a curse. Later, when the nurses left her alone, Marissa asked for a mirror. They hesitated, exchanging nervous glances, before one reluctantly placed a small handheld mirror in her hand. Her fingers shook as she lifted it. The reflection staring back was unrecognizable, half her face swathed in thick white bandages, the visible skin swollen and red, sutures tracing jagged lines where healthy tissue had once been. Her heart lurched. Tears blurred her vision. She slammed the mirror face down on the tray and pressed her palms into her eyes, sobbing silently. Why me? She whispered into the stillness of the room. The door creaked open. Lydia slipped inside, her eyes red as if she'd been crying too. She sat beside the bed, squeezing Marissa's hand. Hey, don't do that, Lydia said softly. Don't hide. You're still you. Marissa shook her head. No, I'm not. I don't even know who I am anymore. You're the strongest person I know, Lydia insisted. You're alive, and we'll get through this. Together. The words were a lifeline, fragile but real. As night fell over Atlanta General, machines hummed in the darkness of Marissa's room. Her body was battered, her face changed forever, but her heart still beat, stubborn and defiant. The battle wasn't over. In fact, it had only begun. Recovery was not a straight line. For Marissa, every hour felt like a new trial. The bandages wrapped tight around her head itched and burned. When the nurses changed them, She winced at the air hitting raw skin. Even lifting a spoon to her lips felt foreign, as if her body no longer belonged to her. Yet she forced herself to keep moving. She learned how to sip soup through a straw. She whispered through the pain. At night, she stared at the ceiling, replaying the doctor's words over and over. There will be permanent scarring. Permanent. The word clung to her like a chain. But in the midst of that darkness, Lydia was there. She brought coffee every morning and sat by the bed with her phone turned off, refusing to let Marissa face the silence alone. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the hospital windows gold, Lydia leaned closer. You're still you, March. Don't let a scar convince you otherwise. Marissa swallowed hard. But what if that's all people see now? The scar. The monster. You're not a monster, Lydia said fiercely. You're a survivor. There's a difference. The words warmed her, if only for a moment. The hospital buzzed with whispers. Nurses lingered by the door, exchanging puzzled looks. Orderlies passed notes to one another when they thought she wasn't watching. Marissa caught fragments. This doesn't happen to healthy people, not without a reason. One night, a resident doctor reviewing her chart muttered under his breath, "Strangest case I've ever seen. She doesn't fit the profile." Marissa frowned. Profile? What does that mean? The doctor shifted awkwardly. This infection, necrotizing fasciitis, it usually happens after a major injury or surgery, or in people with weak immune systems. But you're young, you're healthy. You don't match. So what are you saying? That this just came out of nowhere? He hesitated. I'm saying it's rare. Very rare. The thought gnawed at her. In the quiet of her room, she began tracing back every step of the last week. No wounds. No hikes. No seafood. Nothing unusual. Except, her heart skipped. The box. 2 days before everything started, a small package had arrived at her apartment. It was from Damien, her ex-husband. She hadn't thought much of it. Just some old books, a coffee mug, a bottle of lotion he'd claimed she left behind. She almost threw it all out, but decided to keep the lotion in her bathroom. She had even used it once. Her chest tightened. Could it be? Images of Damien surged forward, memories she had buried deep. His jealous eyes, his sharp words, his threats whispered late at night. If you leave me, you'll regret it. A chill ran down her spine. The next morning, she asked to speak with the hospital's liaison officer. Detective Marcus Hill arrived later that day, a tall man in a worn suit, his notepad tucked under his arm. "Miss Cole, I understand you requested me," he said, pulling up a chair. Marissa nodded, her voice trembling. This might not be an accident." He leaned forward. "What makes you say that?" She swallowed, forcing the words out. 2 days before it happened, I got a package from my ex-husband. Inside was a lotion bottle. I used it once. The next morning, my face started falling apart. Detective Hill's pen froze above the page. His eyes met hers, steady and grave. "Are you suggesting he tampered with it?" "I don't know," Marissa whispered. "But nothing else makes sense." When Lydia visited that evening, Marissa shared what she had told the detective. Lydia's hands curled into fists. "I knew it," Lydia spat. "I told you years ago Damien was poison. If anyone would do something this vile, it's him." Marissa's eyes filled with tears. "It's too insane to be true, isn't it?" "No," Lydia said firmly. "It's exactly the kind of thing he'd do. You don't forget the way he looked at you when you left him." As night settled in, Marissa lay awake, the city lights flickering beyond her window. Her face ached, her body exhausted, but her mind was wide awake. If the infection had come from Damien's package, then this wasn't just a freak medical nightmare. It was a message. And suddenly, the whispers in the hospital didn't feel like questions of chance anymore. They felt like the first tremors of a truth too dark to ignore. The sterile walls of the hospital room faded as Marissa's mind slipped backward, pulled into memories she had fought for years to bury. The mention of Damien's name, the thought of that package, had cracked something open inside her. Suddenly, She was no longer in a hospital bed. She was back in the house they once shared, suffocating under his shadow. When she first met Damien, he had been magnetic. Tall, handsome, with a smile that could melt steel. He charmed her on their first date by quoting poetry in a crowded diner, making her feel like the only person in the room. In those early months, he was attentive, intoxicating. Friends warned her he seemed too much too soon, but Marissa ignored them. She wanted to believe she'd found a man who adored her. But it didn't take long for his affection to sour into possession. "You don't need to see Lydia tonight," he'd say casually, sliding her phone out of her hand. "We should spend time together. Just us." At first, it sounded loving. Then it became routine. Then it became law. Her friends stopped calling. Her mother's visits grew infrequent. Soon, Damien was her entire world, and he wanted it that way. The first time he showed his temper, she still remembers the sound, the shattering of a glass against the kitchen wall, shards raining onto the floor. "All I asked," he snarled, his voice low and dangerous, "was that you don't embarrass me in front of my colleagues." Was that so hard? She had only corrected a detail in his story, a harmless fact, but to Damien, it was betrayal. Afterward, he held her close, apologizing, swearing it would never happen again. And for a while, it didn't. But the fuse had been lit. Every argument after that carried an edge. A slammed door. A raised fist that never quite struck, but hovered long enough to make her flinch. And then came the words. The threats. "If you ever leave me," he whispered one night, his breath hot against her ear, "don't think you'll get away untouched. I'll make sure no one ever looks at you the same." She had tried to laugh it off, to tell herself it was just anger speaking. But the chill that slid down her spine that night never truly left her. Leaving him had been the hardest decision of her life. She remembered the night she packed her suitcase in silence, her heart pounding as she stuffed clothes into the bag. Lydia had waited outside in her car, headlights off, like a getaway driver. Damien had caught her at the door. His smile was calm, eerie. "Running away, Marissa? You think you can just disappear?" "I'm done, Damien," she said, her voice shaking but steady enough. "This isn't love. This is prison." For a moment, his eyes softened, as if he might beg her to stay. But then they hardened into stone. "You'll regret this," he said quietly. "I promise you that." Those words followed her for years, echoing in her head during sleepless nights, creeping into her thoughts when she least expected it. And now, lying in a hospital bed with half her face wrapped in bandages, they returned with terrifying clarity. Detective Hill visited again the next morning. Marissa told him everything. The charm, the control, the threats whispered like poison. "He said if I left him, no one would look at me the same," she confessed, her voice trembling. "Now look at me. Does that sound like a coincidence?" The detective tapped his pen against the notebook, his jaw tight. "No, Miss Cole. It doesn't. We're going to check the package he sent. If he's behind this, we'll find out." Marissa's heart pounded. Part of her longed for justice, for Damien to finally be exposed for the monster he was. But another part trembled at the thought of facing him again, his eyes, his voice, the darkness he carried. That night, Lydia sat by her bed, holding her hand. "You did the right thing telling the detective," Lydia said softly. "This is your chance to finally put him behind bars." Marissa stared at the ceiling, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. What if he's already won? What if this was his plan all along? To destroy me, piece by piece. Lydia squeezed her hand harder. "No, he hasn't won. You're still here. And that's what scares him most." Outside the hospital window, the city lights flickered like distant stars. Marissa closed her eyes, haunted by ghosts of the past, but bracing for what lay ahead. The war Damien had promised years ago might finally be here. And this time, she wouldn't run. Detective Marcus Hill moved quickly. Within 24 hours of Marissa's disclosure, the lotion bottle from Damien's package was in the hands of the state crime lab. The sterile container was sealed, logged, and carried into a laboratory lined with microscopes and humming machines. When the results came back, the evidence was chilling. The lotion wasn't just contaminated. It was crawling with the same flesh-eating bacteria ravaging Marissa's face. The odds of that being coincidence were close to zero. Hill tapped the report against his desk, his jaw clenched. He didn't just send her a gift. He sent her a weapon. Damien's arrest came at dawn. Police cruisers rolled up to his small suburban rental house, their red and blue lights painting the neighborhood in chaos. Still in his robe, Damien opened the door, smirking as if the whole thing was a misunderstanding. "Mr. Damien Cole," the lead officer announced, "you are under arrest for attempted murder." "Attempted murder?" Damien laughed, raising his hands lazily as the cuffs clicked around his wrists. "You people have lost your minds." Neighbors peered from behind curtains as Damien was shoved into the back of a cruiser, his smirk never faltering. At the precinct, in a gray interrogation room with a flickering fluorescent bulb, Damien sat with his arms folded. Detective Hill entered, dropping the lab report on the table. "You want to explain this?" Hill asked, his voice steady. Damien leaned back in his chair. "Explain what?" "My ex-wife's bad luck. The lotion you mailed her contained necrotizing fasciitis bacteria. Same strain that's eating away at her face." Hill's eyes narrowed. "That's not bad luck. That's intent." Damien tilted his head, his smirk widening. "Maybe she contaminated it herself. Maybe she's desperate for attention. Women do crazy things when they want people to feel sorry for them." Hill slammed a fist on the table. "Don't play games with me. You searched how to cultivate bacteria. You ordered petri dishes. You bought lab supplies online. We have the receipts, Damien." For the first time, Damien's smirk faltered. His eyes darkened, the charming mask slipping. "She ruined me," he hissed. "She walked out, left me with nothing, and everyone thinks I'm the monster. Do you know what that does to a man?" "What it does," Hill said coldly, "is give you motive." Meanwhile, at the hospital, Marissa waited in tense silence. Lydia sat by her side, scrolling through updates on her phone. "They've got him," Lydia said at last, squeezing her hand. "They found the bacteria in the lotion. He's finished." Marissa's heart hammered. Relief mingled with dread. She had wanted justice for so long, but the thought of Damien behind bars wasn't enough to erase the scars on her face or the fear in her chest. "What if he gets out?" she whispered. "What if this isn't the end?" Lydia leaned close. "Then we fight again. But you're not alone anymore." Back at the precinct, Hill pushed the photos of Marissa onto the table. Images taken after surgery, her face swollen and bandaged, eyes still glistening with pain. "Look at what you did," Hill demanded. Damien's jaw tightened, but his eyes remained fixed on the table. "She was never going to stay beautiful," he muttered, bitterness dripping from every word. "I just sped up the process." The room fell into a heavy silence. Hill scribbled notes, his hand steady despite the rage bubbling inside him. "That's enough," Hill said finally, signaling the officers at the door. "We'll let the jury hear those words." Damien's smirk returned faintly as he was led away, but there was no denying it now. His mask had slipped. The world would finally see the man Marissa had known all along. That evening, when Hill visited Marissa's hospital room, he delivered the news she had waited for. "We've got him, Ms. Cole. The evidence is solid. He's not walking away from this." Marissa closed her eyes, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. For the first time since the nightmare began, she felt a fragile spark of safety. Damien could no longer touch her, not with his hands, not with his poison, not with his rage. Still, as she touched the bandages on her face, she knew the damage he had done would never fully fade. Justice was coming, but healing would be a longer, lonelier road. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and old paper, its marble steps echoing with the shuffle of reporters and curious onlookers. The case of State versus Damien Cole had already made headlines across Georgia. Ex-husband accused of weaponizing flesh-eating bacteria. The public was morbidly fascinated, unable to turn away from the story of a woman whose face had been destroyed, allegedly by the man who once vowed to love her. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with whispers as the bailiff called order. Cameras weren't allowed, but sketch artists sharpened their pencils, ready to capture every tear, every glare. Damien sat at the defense table in a pressed navy suit, looking as smug as the day police dragged him out of his house. He leaned back in his chair, hands folded, eyes scanning the room with the arrogance of a man who still believed he could talk his way out of anything. Across the room, Marissa entered slowly, escorted by Lydia and a nurse. She wore a wide-brimmed hat and a scarf that wrapped around her face. The crowd quieted. Even in concealment, her presence commanded attention. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Caroline Mitchell, rose first. A seasoned litigator with fire in her voice, she addressed the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, you will hear how this man, Damien Cole, turned something as simple as a lotion bottle into a biological weapon. You will see the receipts, the search history, the lab reports. And you will hear from his victim, Marissa Cole, who sits here today not only scarred, but alive because she refused to let him win. She pointed toward Damien. He didn't just try to kill her body. He tried to kill her identity, her dignity. He failed, but his intent was as cruel as any act of violence you've ever seen. The defense attorney countered with a smooth smile, pacing in front of the jury. This is a tragedy, yes, but it is not a crime committed by my client. There is no proof he infected that bottle. There is no video, no eyewitness. My client sent his ex-wife a box of harmless belongings. What she did with it afterward is unknown. What happened to her is horrific, but coincidences do exist. And hatred, he said, pointing at the prosecution's table, can blind people into seeing guilt where there is none. Damien smirked as if the words tasted sweet. When Marissa took the stand, the room held its breath. She sat behind the witness box, scarf still covering her face. Her voice was low at first, almost fragile. I met Damien when I was 27. At first, he made me feel like the only woman in the world. But that love turned into control. He isolated me, threatened me. And when I left, he swore I'd regret it. He said no one would ever look at me the same. The prosecutor nodded gently. Marissa, what happened 2 days before your infection began? He mailed me a package, she said, her hands trembling. Inside was a lotion bottle. I used it once. Hours later, my skin began to fall away. The defense attorney rose for cross-examination. Mrs. Cole. Excuse me, Miss Cole. How do you know the lotion wasn't already contaminated? Couldn't it have been an accident? Or perhaps, Marissa's voice sharpened. An accident doesn't Google how to grow bacteria. An accident doesn't mail a gift after vowing to ruin me. The courtroom murmured, the weight of her words sinking in. Then came the moment she had dreaded but knew was necessary. At the prosecutor's request, Marissa removed her scarf. Gasps filled the room. The jury, the reporters, even the judge couldn't hide their shock. Her left cheek was carved with scars, skin puckered and uneven. The infection had stolen the softness of her features, leaving behind a brutal testament to her survival. Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice was steady. This is what he did to me. He took my face, but he didn't take my soul. The prosecutor let the silence stretch before speaking. No further questions, Your Honor. As Marissa stepped down, the jury's eyes followed her, not with pity alone, but with anger. They had seen the evidence, but now they had seen the human cost. Damien shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his smirk finally cracking. For the first time since the trial began, he looked less like a man in control and more like a man cornered. And for Marissa, walking back to her seat, it felt like the first real victory in a war she never chose but had no choice but to fight. When Marissa stepped down from the witness stand, the silence in the courtroom lingered like a heavy fog. She could still feel the weight of every eye on her, burning with sympathy, shock, or horror. As she returned to her seat beside Lydia, She kept her chin lifted, refusing to let Damien see her crumble. Her scarf lay folded in her lap now. For years, Damien had told her she was nothing without her beauty. For the first time, she dared to expose the scars he left behind, and she was still standing. The prosecutor's final question echoed in her mind. He didn't just try to kill you, did he? And her own reply, raw and steady, no. He tried to erase me, but I'm still here. The courtroom shifted back into motion. The prosecution rested its case, having let Marissa's testimony hang in the air like thunder. The defense scrambled to recover. Damien's lawyer called 2 character witnesses, former colleagues who claimed he was a good man under stress. Their words fell flat in the shadow of what the jury had just witnessed. Finally, the defense made the desperate decision to put Damien himself on the stand. He straightened his tie, his smirk flickering back to life as he faced the jury. I never hurt Marissa, he began smoothly. She was my wife. I loved her. Maybe too much. But I would never try to kill her. He painted himself as the abandoned husband, the victim of a bitter divorce. He even forced a tear to glisten in his eye. If she believes I did this, I'm sorry she feels that way. But I am not a monster. The prosecutor rose slowly, her eyes locked on him. Not a monster? You searched how to cultivate bacteria. You purchased lab supplies. You mailed her a contaminated bottle. And when confronted, you said, she held up the transcript from his interrogation. She was never going to stay beautiful. I just sped up the process. Do those sound like the words of an innocent man, Mr. Cole? Damien's mouth opened, then closed. His smirk faltered. A murmur rippled through the jury box. The trial reached its final day. Both sides delivered closing arguments, but the energy was no longer balanced. ADA Caroline Mitchell stood tall, her voice ringing through the chamber. This case is not about science alone. It is about intent. It is about a man who swore he would ruin his wife if she left him, and then followed through. Look at the scars on her face. Look at the evidence. Look at the arrogance sitting before you. That is guilt. That is malice. And it demands justice. The defense tried to strike back, but the words felt hollow. There is no video. No eyewitness. Only circumstance. But everyone knew circumstance doesn't grow flesh-eating bacteria in a bottle. The jury deliberated for hours. Marissa sat outside the courtroom with Lydia, her hands clasped tightly together. Every tick of the clock felt like a drumbeat in her chest. What if they don't believe me? She whispered. They will, Lydia said firmly, refusing to let doubt in. They saw you. They saw him. When the bailiff finally called them back in, the air was electric. The jury filed into their seats, faces solemn. Marissa's breath caught in her throat. Madam Foreperson, the judge said, has the jury reached a verdict? Yes, Your Honor. The foreperson stood, unfolding the slip of paper. The silence was suffocating. In the matter of State versus Damien Cole, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty of attempted murder. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, whispers, muffled cries. Damien's smirk collapsed into a mask of fury as deputies closed in. He snarled, "This isn't over, Marissa. You hear me? This isn't over." But the cuffs clicked around his wrists, silencing him at last. Marissa exhaled a breath she didn't know she was holding. Tears blurred her vision, but this time they weren't only of pain. They were of relief, of vindication. She turned to Lydia, who squeezed her hand and whispered, "You did it. He can't hurt you anymore." Marissa closed her eyes, letting the sound of the gavel, the murmurs, the finality of the word guilty wash over her. For the first time since the morning her skin began to fall away, she felt something she thought she had lost forever. Hope. The courthouse was hushed when sentencing day arrived. No cameras were allowed, but the public benches were packed with journalists, law students, and ordinary citizens who had followed every detail of the trial. The weight of the guilty verdict still hung in the air, but today would determine Damien's fate. Marissa sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Lydia sat beside her, a steady presence, whispering soft encouragements. Marissa wore her scarf again, but this time not out of shame, out of control. She would choose when and how the world saw her scars, not Damien. When the bailiff called for order, Judge Evelyn Harper entered the chamber. She was a tall woman with silver hair pinned neatly back, her black robe sweeping as she took her seat. Her reputation was one of fairness but firmness, and as she looked over the courtroom, her gaze lingered on Damien, who sat shackled at the defense table. The prosecutor rose first. "Your Honor," Caroline Mitchell began, her voice sharp with conviction. "The jury has already found this man guilty of attempted murder. But today, we ask for a sentence that reflects not just the crime, but the cruelty. This was not a crime of passion. This was calculated, methodical, and sadistic. He sought to destroy Marissa Cole not only physically, but emotionally and socially. He intended her to live every day as a walking reminder of his hatred. That intent demands the maximum penalty under the law." The defense attorney objected, claiming the prosecution was demonizing Damien, but Judge Harper waved him down. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for, the victim impact statement. Marissa rose slowly. Every eye followed her as she approached the podium. She removed her scarf, letting the light fall across her scars. Murmurs rippled through the gallery, but she stood tall, her voice clear though her hands trembled. "Your Honor," she began, her eyes flicking briefly to Damien before locking on the judge. "For years, I lived under his shadow. I loved him once. I believed in him. But he controlled me, isolated me, threatened me. And when I finally found the courage to leave, he promised I would regret it." She paused, her voice catching. "When my skin began to fall off my face, I thought I was dying. I thought I would never see my family again, never teach my students again, never laugh again. But I survived. He took my face, but he did not take my life. He did not take my spirit." She drew a long breath. "I will live with these scars forever. I will carry this pain forever. But I ask you, Judge Harper, to ensure I do not have to carry the fear of him ever again. Give him the sentence he deserves. Protect me. Protect others." Tears shimmered in the corners of her eyes, but she did not wipe them away. She stood tall until the judge gestured gently for her to sit. Damien was given his chance to speak. He stood, straightening his suit, the smirk flickering faintly back across his lips. "I never meant for this to happen," he said smoothly. "Marissa exaggerates. She always did. Maybe the lotion was contaminated before I mailed it. Maybe she used it wrong. I don't know. But I'm not the monster they make me out to be. I loved her, and she ruined me." His words landed like stones, heavy and cold, but the jury foreperson sitting in the audience only shook their head. Everyone in the room could see the same truth. He felt no remorse. Judge Harper leaned forward, her gavel resting at her fingertips. "Mr. Cole, the jury has spoken. The evidence is undeniable. You sought to destroy another human being in the most vicious way possible. You caused irreversible harm, not only to Ms. Cole's body, but to her peace of mind. And you stand before this court without an ounce of genuine remorse." She lifted her gavel. "For the crime of attempted murder, you are hereby sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole." The gavel struck wood, a sharp crack that echoed like thunder. The room erupted in gasps and whispers. Damien's smirk vanished, replaced with a snarl. He lunged to his feet, shouting, "This isn't justice. She'll never escape me." Deputies restrained him swiftly, dragging him from the courtroom as his voice dissolved into muffled rage. Marissa closed her eyes as relief washed over her. Lydia gripped her hand tightly. "It's over," she whispered. Marissa nodded, tears rolling freely down her cheeks. For the first time in years, the promise Damien had made, to ruin her, to haunt her, no longer had power. She had stood in the fire, and she was still here. Scarred, yes. Changed, yes. But alive. And free. The weeks after Damien's sentencing were strangely quiet. For the first time in years, Marissa no longer woke in the middle of the night hearing his voice in her head. The gavel's crack still echoed in her memory, a sound she would never forget, the sound of freedom. But freedom wasn't the same as healing. Healing was slower, harder. When she left the hospital, the world felt sharper, brighter, and sometimes cruel. Strangers stared. Children tugged at their mother's sleeves in grocery store aisles. Even when she wore her scarf, she felt their eyes on her, whispering behind their hands. Each glance was a reminder of what Damien had taken. Yet every morning, when she looked into the mirror, she forced herself to repeat the words she had spoken in court. He took my face, but not my soul. Lydia refused to let her isolate herself. She dragged Marissa to coffee shops, to bookstores, even to a local art exhibit. You're still you, Lydia reminded her. And you deserve to live again. One Saturday, Lydia brought her to a community center hosting a support group for survivors of violence and trauma. Marissa resisted at first. She didn't want to sit in a circle of strangers, swapping horror stories. But as she listened, something unexpected happened. A woman across the room lifted her sleeve, revealing scars from burns. My ex said I'd never be more than damaged goods, the woman said, her voice steady. But here I am, breathing, laughing, living. Marissa's chest tightened. The words pierced her like sunlight through clouds. She wasn't alone. She never had been. When it was her turn to speak, she hesitated. Then slowly, she unwound her scarf. The room grew quiet as she revealed her scars. My husband once told me no one would look at me the same, she said softly. He was right. They don't. But maybe that's okay. Because I'm not the same woman I was. I'm stronger. And I'm still here. The group nodded, some smiling through tears. For the first time, Marissa didn't feel like a victim being studied. She felt like a survivor being understood. Months passed, and Marissa began to rebuild. She returned to teaching, at first nervous that her students would recoil. Instead, children surprised her with their honesty. One little girl looked up at her one morning and asked, "Does it hurt?" Marissa smiled gently. "Sometimes. But you know what hurts more? Giving up. And I'm not giving up." The girl hugged her tightly. In that embrace, Marissa felt something shift inside her. She began volunteering at the support group, mentoring new members who walked through the doors with fresh wounds and trembling voices. Her story, once a source of shame, became a weapon of strength. Reporters reached out, asking for interviews, and though she was hesitant, she agreed to a few. Her message was always the same. Scars are not the end of beauty. They are proof that we survived. On the anniversary of Damien's sentencing, Marissa stood in the park near her apartment, the same park she used to walk through on mornings before her life unraveled. The air was crisp, filled with the laughter of children and the bark of dogs. She wore her scarf loosely, letting the wind touch her face. Lydia stood beside her, sipping coffee. "You know," she said, "you could have let him destroy you. But you didn't. You're more alive now than I've ever seen you." Marissa turned to her friend, eyes shining. "He wanted me invisible, but I refused to hide. My scars tell a story, and it's mine now, not his." They walked together down the path, the sun spilling golden light across the city skyline. For the first time, Marissa didn't feel like she was walking in Damien's shadow. She was walking into her own light. In the years that followed, Marissa's name became a quiet symbol in survivor circles, a reminder that resilience can grow even in the darkest soil. Her scars never faded, but neither did her spirit. And whenever she stood in front of a mirror, she no longer saw the face Damien tried to ruin. She saw a woman who had endured hell and emerged unbroken.